All right, everybody. So today what we're going to do, we're going to take a stock Bitmain Antminer S19. Doesn't matter which 19 you have, or it's the A, S19K Pro, the J Pro, doesn't matter. They all look the same. So we're going to be taking this apart, showing you all the different components, and then putting it back together in the LOKI configuration. A couple of things that I want you to just keep in mind when you're tearing apart your S19. You want to be looking for anything that might be broken, cracked, burned, anything like that, especially if you're buying a used S19, which most of them are nowadays anyways. All the links that I've got in the build sheet are going to be used machines. You just want to make sure that they don't have any falling heat sinks. They don't have any burned out chips. There's no connections that are a little loose or wonky. And also, when you're tearing it apart for the first time, you'll want to give it a thorough cleaning. So definitely get yourself a can of compressed air and just kind of spray it out when you pull the hash boards out. Now, another thing to note for the LOKI rig is that when you're using the APW3++, you're only getting about 12.5 volts, and it's at about 900 watts. You can't really use more than 2 boards on this configuration. You'll need to get a diverter for it, whether you do 1 board or you do 2 boards. You'll need to put something in the spaces between the boards. So if it's a 2 board build, you'll need something in the middle to kind of help divert that air. And if it's a single board build, you'll need something on the outside to divert the air inside. Otherwise, what happens is the air just, it goes to the path of least resistance, and you want all that air flowing across the chips and not flowing around the chips. So just something to keep in mind as you're building this out. Everything that I've got in here will be in the build sheet. I've put links in there and prices for everything. I tried to make it as easy as possible for anybody who's getting into this build particularly. Okay, so let's take apart this stock S19 and get into the build. First things first, just take a look at it. You've got your power supply on this side. You've got your fans, intake, and exhaust over here. And you've got your case. Now, when we pop this off, you're going to see ribbon cables. You're going to see a control board. You're going to see a power cable and fan cables. You just want to unplug everything. Be super gentle with it. They do generally come apart pretty easily, but if it's the first time they've ever been torn down, they might be a little hard to pull off the very first time. So get everything unplugged. Now, also, I find it's very helpful to get yourself a magnet tray to put all your screws in when you are doing this. That way you can keep everything in one place and you don't lose the screws. Also, when you're taking the screws out, it is pretty easy to strip them. Just be mindful of that. Maybe use a screwdriver instead of an impact screwdriver. I've got my impact over here just in case, but generally I don't use that. I try to use the hand screwdriver. All right, so I've pulled the board off. Depending on what board you want to go with, this is an Epic board, so it's not stock with these. You can use any board that works with the S19 configuration. Just keep in mind that you want to make sure that it works with the LOKI board. I'm going to set that off to the side over here. Now I'm going to be taking off this APW12 power supply because for this build, we don't actually need it. There's a couple of screws on the side here that hold it to the main housing of the S19. Just pull those out. Pull that top cover off, set it to the side. And now you'll see 4 screws here on the power lugs. You've got positive and negative. Just pop those out real quickly. This is what I generally use the impact for. Once you get those 4 off of there, you should be able to slide the APW12 off. Just like that. Boom. Now we have a freed up APW12. now what we can do is we don't have to take the intake fans off for this. So I'm going to leave the intake fans on. We're going to take off these exhaust fans. That just comes right off. And now we just pull these boards off. And like I said, we want to inspect each board individually. So what you're looking for is these are the heat sinks. You're looking for any that have fallen off. If they've fallen off, you'll want to repaste them. This is your main aluminum bodied board on the back. These are all the heat sinks on the front. So everything looks good with this board. We're going to set it to the side. This configuration that I'm doing is a single board build. So I'm going to be taking 2 of these boards out, setting them to the side, and not doing anything with them. Everything looks good. Nothing looks burned up. Nothing looks like it's falling off. I'm looking in between these here to make sure nothing is burnt or black. It's an indication of something might be wrong with it. Looks good to me. No dust. Looks very clean. Hint, hint. I cleaned mine before I've done this. I've taken this apart several times. All right, so I didn't pick any special board in particularly. I just grabbed one. So we're going to use this board here. And then I have my flow diverters, these black 3D printed things here that Sat Stacking Pleb sent me. They're just going to go in. Make sure, because if you differentiate between the two sides, you see how there's a pointy end here that tapers out versus the rounded end here. This rounded end is going to go at the exhaust side. So we're going to slide these in on the edges. Just like so. So I've created a channel here that the board will slide into, and then that'll allow the air to flow across the board instead of around it. Now that the board is back in place, I'll put the fans back on. All right. Because I'm only using one board, I'm actually not going to use these bus bars. So I'm going to directly power my hash board with these 2 ports here. You can see them, the front and back. So the front one is positive, the back one is negative. It's important not to mess this up, otherwise you will fry your boards. So before I slide the control board on here, I want to show you the LOKI board itself and the way that it goes on your control board. So you've got your control board here. You can see the power socket there. You've got your jumper sockets here and your fan ports. Now, your LOKI board, you're going to have 2 boards most likely. If you get the LOKI Lite, you only get this tiny board. So the LOKI Lite is this single board here. The Duo comes with both. I recommend getting the Duo just so that you have both boards. Not every configuration needs both boards, but this one does make it easier. So this bigger board here goes in one of these jumper slots, where the smaller board goes in your power port. You want to make sure that the words, these little gold words here, it's hard to see on the camera, they say facing towards control board edge. Make sure that those are facing the edge. Now, when you connect up these 2 boards together, you want to make sure the 2 ports, the one that's labeled data on each board, is the same wire. So for my data cable, I've used this purple wire, and for the V3 I've used the gray wire. So just make sure those are the same when you're putting it in. So I'll slide my board in. Okay, so that part is done. Now what we're going to do is we're going to plug the fans into the fan port. All right, so the next portion of this is to get the power supply ready. And I will have links to the configuration or the modification for the APW3, but it just kind of goes as follows. So you're gonna have a stock APW3, looks very similar to this. You're gonna pop this cover off and pull the piece of plastic out. Once you do that, you're going to have something that looks like this. Now, there is a tiny little screw that's called the pentometer. What you're going to do is you're going to take a screwdriver, you're going to reach down there, and you're going to spin that screw counterclockwise until you hear it start. It's about 15 to 20 turns. Once you hear it start clicking, just quarter turn clockwise. Now your APW3 is ready to power your LOKI rig. So you're going to take your OFC 4-gauge wire that I've got linked in the build sheet. Looks like this. You're going to crimp your copper lugs onto the ends. Make sure that you crimp these really well. So you're going to take these copper lugs, you're going to crimp them onto each end, and then color code with some heat shrink on either end of each cable. When you're done, you're going to get something that looks like this. Keep in mind, another thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to also modify one of these plugs that comes off of the APW3 so that you can power up your control board. So you'll have 3 yellow and 3 black, and you'll just wire those to some smaller lugs at the end so that you have positive and negative. You'll put the positive on the bottom set and the negative on the top set of terminals. And once you screw it down and you put the cover back on, you should have something that looks like this. Now, my build in particular has a backpack for my APW3. You don't need it, but it does make it cleaner. You can reach out to Altair to try to get one of these, or 3D print it yourself. I know that Ixtech also sells backpacks that hold the APW3s in place. So there's different types of styles that you can get. This one's from Altair for the Urlacher. So once I've configured my APW3, I'm just going to slide it in place. And I'm going to connect the cables. As I noted before, make sure that you put the cable lugs on the right spot on the hashboard. The front is positive, the back is negative. So closest to the fans is positive, furthest from the fans is negative. I would hand tighten these before you use a screwdriver just so you don't break anything. Okay, now that those are in place, we're going to take our connector here and we're going to plug it into the control board. Now, something to note here is that for my build, I actually have this box here, this 5-volt power supply for my Vonnet's Wi-Fi bridge. This just allows me to power the Wi-Fi Vonnet's bridge from the APW3. It takes the 12 volts from the APW3 and breaks it down to 5 volts, and that's what powers the Vonnet's. You don't need the Vonnet's. You can actually just hook it up to a regular Ethernet cable, but I find that the Vonnet's does keep this build a little bit cleaner because you can move it all over the place, the house, and not have to worry about running an Ethernet cable to wherever room you're trying to run it in. So for me, I got this. It's $9. I did link it in the build sheet, so you can go easily buy one from Ixtech and then plug it in. It makes it super easy. It also lights up, so it's kind of neat. Then you just take the Ethernet cable on the Vonnet's, plug it into the Ethernet port. And the last thing you're going to want to do is take one of those ribbon cables and plug your LOKI board into the hash board. Perfect. Now, what we're going to do is we're just going to put all the top pieces back on and take our power cord, plug it into the APW3, make sure everything turns on. There we have it. This LOKI rig is ready to be plugged in. So I'm going to plug it in, make sure everything turns on, and then I'll swing over to the dashboard. Okay, so everything turned on, powered up successfully. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the computer, and I'm going to show you how to use Angry IP Scanner to find the IP address for your miner. And then what I'll also do is show you how to flash the SD card with Bellina Etcher so that you can use the firmware of your choice. I'm going to be using the Epic control board. So the firmware is already flashed on it, so I won't be needing to use that. But I'll just show you kind of how it works. And then we'll hop into the dashboard and mess with some of the settings and show you the machine hashing. All right, we're back. Before we get into the dashboard, which I'm going to get to, I want to show you a couple things that'll just kind of help you if you're trying to build your LOKI rig for the very first time. This is going to be very basic. So for the people who've already built one and you're just kind of watching, feel free to skip through this stuff. So in the build sheet, you're going to have an SD card. You're going to need one of these. 4 gigabytes max, because you don't need anything bigger than that. You're going to need a SD card reader. So I've got a little USB SD card reader here. I'm just going to slide my SD card in there. I'm going to place this inside of my laptop. Now, the first thing that I'm going to show you is Bellina Etcher, and I'm going to show you how to flash some firmware. I'm going to be using Brains firmware. I'm going to show you how to flash that firmware on there so that when you install it on your S19, you can run aftermarket firmware and not the stock firmware. This allows you to underclock, overclock, do a lot of cool things. Whatever firmware you choose is up to you. You can use LuxOS, you can use Brains, you can use Epic, you can use tons of different firmwares. But I'm going to be showing you Brains. That's the one that I've used in the past. It is going to be a little confusing because the dashboard that we're using is actually Epic. And the reason I'm using Epic's dashboard is because the control board I have on my Bitcoin miner, on my LOKI rig, is an Epic control board. It actually doesn't allow me to use any other kind of firmware. So keep that in mind. I'm going to be showing you how to install Brains, but we're going to be using Epic on the dashboard. So when it goes from Brains to Epic, you're going to be like, what the heck happened? That's what happened. All right, first things first, I'm going to show you guys how to download and flash Brains firmware onto an SD card. This will work for any type of firmware. Doesn't matter what kind of firmware you have. You just need to make sure you get the right firmware file for your machine. And once you have that, you can flash it using Bellina Etcher, which I'll also show you how to do. Keep in mind, you're going to need a micro SD card. I recommend nothing bigger than a 4 gigabyte micro SD card because you're only using up, a very small portion of space, and anything bigger, I think it starts to mess with the way that the firmware performs. Without further ado, let's get right into it. I have the Brains website pulled up here, brains.com. What you're going to do is you're going to go over here and you're going to click on firmware. You're going to click download. Now, this is going to pull up a couple of different things. You can either batch install with Toolbox. You can install it on one machine. You can install it on, 100 machines. So if you want to make your job a little bit easier, you can use batch install with Toolbox. A little caveat, the reason I'm not using batch install is the last time I tried to use Brains Toolbox, and this is probably a user error and not necessarily Brains' fault, but the last time I tried to use Brains Toolbox to flash the OS, first and foremost, whenever I turned my laptop off or closed my laptop, the machine just wouldn't run. And secondly, when I pulled Brains off of the control board that I was using and tried to put the stock firmware back on it, my Linux board got destroyed. And now I don't think this is Brains' fault. I think this is user error. I must have done something wrong, but now I just don't trust it. And because I'm only using one machine, the manual flashing process is not a problem. I can understand if you're using 100 machines, if you got a large farm or even a small farm and you've got, over 20 machines, then I can see how using the Brains Toolbox would be a very good tool in your toolbox.
quote unquote. So yeah, you can do that. It does make your life a little easier. Just proceed with caution. That's just my 2 cents. Let's get in. We're going to go down here to the S19 series models. You know, they've got the S17. They've also got the S9 series. So this works for all these models. We're going to go with the S19, S21 series. And I have a Linux board. So I'm going to click download Linux. Now you can see up here, it's already downloading, and now it's downloaded. So next we're going to jump over to Balena Etcher, and I'm going to show you guys how to flash the firmware onto your SD card. I've got this pulled up. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click flash from file. Now I'm going to go click the file that I just downloaded, Brains OS AM2. Now I'm going to select the target. Now be very careful when you do this. Make sure that you don't select the wrong target. Obviously, it makes it easy. It doesn't show the other two. Like, look, you've got my system drive here and my 2 system drives. You don't want to download to those. So I'm going to use the mass storage device, the 3.97 gigabyte drive that I already have. So we're going to select that one and we're going to click flash. And this will take a few minutes. It could be really fast. It could be really quickly. I'm going to type in my password real fast. So it's flashing the drive. And as soon as it's done flashing, you should be able to just unplug it straight from the computer. And it's validating. All right. So now it is finishing up. It's done. We can either flash another or we can just unplug it from the device. So I'm going to unplug it from my device. Now you're going to take this SD card. You're going to grab your control board. And depending on which control board you have, your SD slot is going to be easily accessible or it's not going to be accessible. But there is going to be an SD card slot, as far as I know. I haven't worked with one that doesn't. So you just slide that into the SD card slot there. Kind of see it right there. Just slide that in. Plug it into your miner during the build process, and you are ready to go. Now, the next thing that I'm going to show you is how to find your IP address with Angry IP. Okay, so I have Angry IP scanner pulled up here on my computer. Angry IP works with Mac, works with Windows. It's a great software. It's free, and there's no ads or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click start. It's going to run. It takes a little bit of time to go through all of the IPs. So just kind of be aware. But once it finishes here in a second, all right, it's done. So we're going to scroll through and we're going to find the green ones. And there they are. So you can see all the different IP addresses that I have on my network. Depending on which control board that you have, it's not going to have a description here. So you may have to just start going through each one individually. But mine, I'm using a Epic control board. So it says cminer here, .local. So I know that this one, 192.168.0-111, is the IP address for that control board. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go copy IP, and then I am just going to type that in at the top here. Let's go paste and go. I'm going to have to type in the password, which for the Epic board is let me in. For Brains, it's root. I don't know what it is for Lux or for Vanish. All right. So we have the dashboard here. This machine right now is running very inefficient, about 48.9 joules per terahash. I don't really care. I don't pay for the electricity. So the fact that it's running and it's heating my studio is great. I'm getting something. I'm sure if I played around with some of the settings or used a different firmware, I could get a much higher efficiency. So obviously 48 joules per terahash is just absolutely horrendous. I've got it. I've only got one board turned on right now. You can see the real-time hash rate. It's been mining for a while. It's just straight flat. I've got my pool set up, my pool information, got the fans, some PSU stats. You know, we're getting 14 volts at 703 watts. I can turn the other two boards on with the APW3 setup that I'm using. I can only turn on one more board. So I could turn on another board, but the problem that I have right now is I don't want to heat this room up too hot. So I'm only using one board. There are a couple of different settings that I can go to. I can go to the cooling section. I can do the temperature guards. This is with Epic firmware, obviously. Brains is a little bit different, but I can set the shutdown temperature and I can set the set the critical temperature. So right now my shutdown temperature is 85 degrees Celsius and the critical is 100 degrees Celsius. So if it gets to 85, it will start to shut the miner off to keep it from overheating. And if it gets to 100 degrees for some reason, it will not turn back on. So that's very critical. Fans here, this is pretty cool. I can set auto fan if I want it to adjust back and forth. I don't. I want it to be at a certain temperature or a certain setting because I want to keep the noise level down for my neighbors. So I've actually got it set at 45 here. I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but I'll turn it up so that you can hear it. I'll point the microphone. So that's it turned all the way up. I'm going to turn it back to 45. Now, I'm sure that there is a ratio between the speed of the fans and the amount of air pushing through the miner and the actual efficiency of the miner. So maybe that's part of my problem and why I'm getting 48 joules per terahash. I don't know. But moving on, we can set the minimum working fans. So I've got it set to 2 because I'm only using 2 fan ports on my control board. So this allows me to kind of spoof the control board a little bit. In the settings, we have the mining config. Obviously, that's all of the address information. We have the performance, so we can tune a little bit here if we want to do manual tuning, which is actually what I'm running right now. I'm doing a manual tune running at 223 megahertz, 14 volts. I can go down here to perpetual tune, and I can kind of use the different tuning settings that Epic has. These are all great, but not exactly what I want. So I'm using just a manual tuning setting. And then lastly, you've got system updates, preferences, those kinds of things. I would recommend no matter like whatever firmware you're using, just play around with it. Definitely do a little bit of searching to find out what it does. So over here, we can obviously reset to default settings. We can stop mining. We can restart, reboot, lock it, all that good stuff. We can change the color. I don't know who uses white. It's always dark for me. I don't like the light settings. Okay, so somewhere in this, you're gonna find logs as well. I'm not seeing them, which is odd. And just like that, that's how you flash the firmware. That's how you find your IP. And that's how you go through your dashboard and get to your dashboard. So every miner is going to be a little bit different depending on what firmware you're using, depending on the miner that you're using. It's going to change a little bit here and there. And it's actually not that hard. It's pretty simple. But these are some of the things that I wish I'd have known when I jumped down the rabbit hole trying to figure out my first LOKI rig. With that, guys, make sure that you check on the build sheet in the description of the video. If you guys liked this video, liked the series, let me know in the comments section. If you want to help support the show, please like, subscribe, share it out to all your friends, show them how to build the LOKI rig as well. If you want to donate to the show to help us continue with some of these builds, I would appreciate it. You don't have to. Don't feel like you need to. Just watching and sharing out is support enough, in my opinion. But with that, guys, this has been the LOKI build. We will see you guys next week for an air-cooled Bitcoin mining build. With that, guys, keep on building, keep on stacking, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.